Order, order. I call Dr. Simon Ofer to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship, and thank you, Minister, for attending. I'd also like to thank the Backbench Business Committee and their co-signatures for my application, and I'd like to place on record my thanks to MSF UK and also Professor Ramsey Khamis for their assistance in preparation for today. So, this debate could not have come at a more crucial time, actually, for healthcare in Gaza. In about a week's time, many aid agencies who provide medical care are going to be barred from operating in Gaza. And I believe there's going to be an urgent question to the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary, today about this very situation. So this is a very live debate, and I'd like to thank all the speakers for putting down to say something about this really crucial issue. In June of last year, I was preparing to go to the Chamber for Foreign Office oral questions, and I received a phone call from my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Inglis, who works for Healthcare Workers Watch. She told me that just hours before that, a GP in Gaza was killed by an Israeli soldier shot in the head. And I don't know why. I think it may have been because I'm also a GP, but this really hit home to me, the situation that was happening in Gaza. And actually, over 1,000 healthcare workers are now being murdered in Gaza, while countless others remain detained. So, talking about the healthcare system in Gaza, I'd also like to talk about healthicide as a concept. The deliberate targeting of healthcare workers is becoming an instrument of war, not just in Gaza, but in other places in the world. Now, healthcare workers, they don't have sides. They're not partisan. The only side that they're on is on the side of humanity. And we must stop this developing situation in the world. And in addition, the healthcare system in Gaza after this targeting is near total collapse. And as I say, in a week's time, many aid agencies, over 30 of them, are going to be barred from working in Gaza. So I'd like to take both those issues and discuss them. The targeting of healthcare workers in Gaza has been widespread and well documented. Since October 23, 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed, hospitals have been bombed and raided, senior doctors have been detained. And in fact, I talked to one healthcare worker in Gaza, and they said they couldn't leave the hospital in scrubs because they would be identified as a healthcare worker and arrested. Later this evening, I'll be hosting a launch event for the investigation into the Gaza aid worker massacre on the 23rd of March, when 15 emergency workers were massacred by Israeli forces. And also, I couldn't come to this debate without mentioning the tragic case of Hind Rajab, a 5-year-old Palestinian girl murdered by Israeli forces alongside 6 of her family members. And crucially, 2 paramedics who were coming to save her life were also killed. So her voice will continue to haunt the world. And I'm hoping later on today to meet her mother, and I want to be able to look her in the eye and say, this government is doing all it can to prevent another situation happening like happened to her daughter. So healthicide is becoming a new phenomenon in war. In Syria, for example, healthcare workers were systematically targeted by the then Syrian government and Russian forces over 13 years ago. And the same is happening in Sudan. So there's a bigger point. We must stop this happening. And this is something I think this country should campaign upon in the world. So the current situation in Gaza, as I say, is quite grim for healthcare. There's not a single hospital that's fully functional in the Gaza Strip, while 50% of them are partially functional. Among primary healthcare centres, there's only 1.5% that are fully functional, 3 out of 200. There's not a single operating hospital in northern Gaza or in Rafah. Healthcare workers are conducting over 100 consultations a day. In British general practice, I'm not allowed to do more than 25, so it gives you a feeling of how much work these people are doing, and that's putting an enormous strain on the healthcare system. There was an interim rapid damage and needs assessment conducted jointly by the United Nations, the EU and the World Bank, and it found that there had been more than £1.47 billion of damages inflicted on the health sector, and recovery and reconstruction will cost about £8 billion. So there's a massive need to rebuild the healthcare facilities in Gaza. 2 weeks ago, I also heard direct testimony from a British doctor who's just returned from Gaza. And she actually witnessed the willful destruction of medical equipment, for example, cutting off the end of all the ultrasound machines and the systematic destruction of medical data. She described seeing patients arriving with sniper wounds that were so precise that they were clearly made to cause disabilities that would be lifelong and therefore harm young people in Gaza. For example, I saw... I will give way.
I thank him for giving way, and like me, many residents across the Filton and Bradley Stoke constituency have been horrified to see the scale of human suffering on the ground in Gaza. And it's right that our government has been doing what it can to bring children in urgent medical need to the UK for treatment. Now, would he agree with me that it's vital that our government continues to do all that it can to help vulnerable children in Gaza?
Yes, can I thank my honourable friend? And indeed, the medical evacuation of young people is something that many of us campaigned upon and which the Minister did deliver, although there are certain problems which I understand he may go into recently. I think also, I'll come back to this a little bit later, one of the key issues in Gaza is that it's allowed to medically evacuate everyone, to East Jerusalem, which is still in the occupied territories, but at the moment that's not allowed. And East Jerusalem has some well-functioning hospitals with capacity, and I do think this is one of the asks that we need to do. So can I thank her for her intervention?
Allow me on young people.
Certainly, yes.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. He's talking very passionately about the impact of the physical injuries to young people, but we know that trauma recovery for children and young people will have to be a vital part of the long-term solution for Gaza. And the International Centre for Child Trauma, Prevent and Recovery has pioneered a capacity-building model of training to put as many counsellors on the ground as possible. And I engaged with their co-director a fundraising event in Ceres in my North East Fife constituency. Does he agree with me that when the UK government is looking at how it funds and supports, it needs to look at trauma recovery too?
Okay, yes. Well, can I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention? And I absolutely agree. And war is traumatic on so many different levels. And I think that mental health is a key part of holistic care and must be covered in any sort of rebuilding of healthcare workers. And also we need to start to look at training people in the Gaza Strip and in the occupied territories as well, because it's better to train them rather than import them. So, yes, I certainly will.
He quite rightly makes a passionate case for why we should be doing more to help the healthcare system in Gaza. It's quite clear that the 50 children that were severely ill from Gaza that were evacuated by this government and treated in NHS hospitals were well cared for. Indeed, the Prince of Wales visited some of them in hospital and said explicitly afterwards they'd faced experiences no child should ever have to face. But does he agree with me that the next step this government should be taking is to treat, as he suggests, those children in the region, and that there's plenty of British medics who are willing to help and go out there, and we should be, as a government, encouraging them to use their NHS expertise to treat children in the region, but also to train up medics in specialisms that they desperately need?
Yeah. Well, can I thank my honourable friend? I think he's absolutely spot on. I do think we, rather than evacuating children to the NHS, which was, I think, the right thing to do at the time while war was raging, it's actually better to build up facilities in the area and start training doctors and also other health professionals to look after people in the area. I know we are training some Gazan medical students who I've met, but I do think the future lies in building up medical training in those areas. So,
give way on that point.
Certainly, yeah.
I'm really grateful to my moral friend securing this debate, but also the very pertinent points he's making. Does he agree that the Minister should therefore work with the Health Secretary to ensure that clinicians of all kinds are able to get the release they need in order to spend the appropriate amount of time in the region in order to provide that training and clinical support?
Yes, can I thank my honourable friend for that very timely intervention? I know her professional skills are also something that she uses in Parliament, and I think it is really important that we support the healthcare system in Gaza, and I know that the Foreign Office is very keen to do this. So yes, there has been certainly, yes, yeah.
To the honourable member for giving way and strongly support the points he's raising in advancing this case. I'm just slightly worried about the expression in the region. What we need to do is to get medical workers into Gaza and to make sure that they can safely deploy their skills within that area. We're long past the time when the Israeli regime could justify their actions in terms of self-defense. And the best way of achieving safe passage for medical aid workers in that area is to get the IDF out and to get international peacekeepers in.
Can I thank my honourable friend, and I think he's absolutely spot on. I mean, actually, the most important thing is peace, so we can actually build a healthcare system. And although there has been a ceasefire, there's still quite a lot of Palestinians are still dying, and that's something we need to make a stable environment first. But I totally agree with you. I think we have to be pragmatic, and I think that while there is functioning hospitals in East Jerusalem, we should be able to take people out of Gaza and get them treated there. The healthcare, as I've just outlined, the healthcare facilities in Gaza have been very, certainly very damaged. And I will come on later to some possibilities of bringing mobile units in on a short-term basis. I think, obviously, long-term, we need to build up the hospital sector. Yes, certainly.
I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate and giving way. I was reading that Gaza is now the home to the largest number of child amputees, and yet Save the Children are saying the prosthetic centres in Gaza are just not functioning. Would he agree that Israel now needs to lift all restrictions on aid getting into Gaza so these young people can get the prosthetic limbs that they absolutely vitally need for day-to-day life?
Can I thank my honourable friend? A point really well made, and I think actually, it comes even more basic than that. We need to allow medicines into Gaza. At the moment, medicines aren't being transported in there, and obviously other things like prosthetic limbs are very, very important as well. So, yeah, absolutely, we need to open up the border. And actually, we also need to bring humanitarian aid, not just medical aid, into Gaza. So it's certainly, I think we need to open up the borders and allow relief into Gaza. So thank you for that intervention. I was just going back to my speech. There seems to be a slightly sinister thing going on where snipers are actually targeting very specific areas. So one area is the brachial plexus. That causes long-term disability. And another area is in the leg, hitting the sciatic nerve. And that also causes permanent paralysis and disability. And that's I think, a cynical approach to war. I know war is evil in many of its aspects, but this is particularly something that we should call out as well. Can I just say a little something about public health, Mr. Chair? So public health is incredibly important for the people in Gaza Strip. 89% of water, sanitation and hygiene infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged. And that's probably one of the most important things we do, get clean water to people. There's about 250,000 cases of acute malnutrition in children this year, as well as 37,000 cases in pregnancy and breastfeeding women. There's violence against women and reproductive health has led to 41% fall in births in Gaza, as well as a high number of maternal deaths and miscarriages and newborn mortality. And we've seen strikes on maternity wards and also the destruction of Gaza's largest IVF clinic, wiping out 5,000 embryos. So premature births have also sharply increased, with 1 in 5 newborns requiring intensive neonatal care, and respiratory infections, acute watery diarrhoea and skin infections are widespread. And at least, this is a horrifying statistic, I think, Mr. Chair. 11 children have reportedly died from hypothermia this winter, including a 2-month-old baby and a 1-year-old child. So there's so many serious problems. One other I'd like to pinpoint as well is a syndrome called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is something very rare. I've seen it once as a doctor. However, this leads to increasing paralysis and often requires ventilation. And the causes are often very difficult to identify. There seems to be an epidemic in Gaza of this condition, Guillain-Barré, and it may be triggered by infections. It may be triggered by other things, and in fact, it's been slightly sinister. Some of the doctors who are working in Gaza have tried to take soil samples away from Gaza, and they've been restricted from doing so. So I don't know what's causing this, but it's a very acute problem. Guillain-Barré, and it can have very serious repercussions as well. So, on top of all this, we are now facing this even more alarming development where 37 international NGOs, including Médecins Sans Frontières, are facing deregulation on the 1st of March. That's next week, everyone. And if this proceeds, they'll be no longer able to legally operate in Gaza, the West Bank, or even East Jerusalem. Now, MSF alone support 1 in 5 hospital beds in Gaza and assist in 1 in 3 births. And in 2025, it performed 22,000 surgical operations, handled over 100,000 trauma cases, and carried out over 800,000 outpatient consultations. If these organisations are forced out, then the consequences will be catastrophic. So, I asked the Minister, would he urge Israeli officials to reopen humanitarian medical corridor, allowing critically ill patients to travel to East Jerusalem and the West Bank for treatment? The World Health Organization holds a list of approximately 18,000 urgent cases, yet permission to travel the short distance for care has been routinely denied, and that includes urgent cancer care as well. And will he use any possible leverage we have to ensure that the Israeli government also immediately pauses this deregistration of international humanitarian aid and negotiates their continued presence in Gaza? I think, as the Honourable Gentleman mentioned, we need to establish a medical supply chain which allows medicine and equipment into Gaza as well, immediately. And we need to find rapid alternatives to the destroyed facilities. Now, I do know that, for example, there are mobile operating theatres that could be in Gaza within 48 hours, about the size of articulated lorries that could be driven in, and they're self-maintaining things. We could be operating with those almost immediately, and that's something that we must push to allow into Gaza. And also, we need to start rebuilding hospitals and also build up field hospitals as well. So there is a lot to do, but we must start on this process. And finally, will he work with our allies to ensure that attacks on healthcare are investigated and documented and prosecuted wherever they occur? Healthicide must become a recognised and exposed, and we must deter it in the world. So, one of my questions: how I was refused entry into the West Bank last year, and I realised that it's very difficult to get any leverage over the Israeli government to influence their decisions, and I do respect that, and I understand that the Foreign Office try what they can, but is it time that we actually impose proper full sanctions on Israel if this doesn't resolve itself? So I'd like the Minister, I'd like to hear his opinion on that. So to conclude, healthcare workers in Gaza are performing the most difficult and courageous work imaginable under often literal fire. They deserve protection, and their patients deserve care. So we cannot simply look away, and we need action now. Thank you.
Thank the Honourable Gentleman very much for opening the debate. Can I remind all backbench members they should continue to bob if they wish to continue to be called. And if, as Honourable members can see, we have the level of interest that we do, if everyone can keep themselves to 5 minutes or less, we will get all backbenchers in to speak. The question, therefore, is that this House has considered government support for the healthcare system in Gaza. Jim Shannon.
First of all, Sir Jeremy, can I thank you for calling me, and a pleasure it is, as always, to serve under your chairship. A big thank you to the Honourable Member for Stroud for setting the scene, as he always does, incredibly well. He's making a reputation for himself in this House for speaking up for important issues, and today he has done that again. Thank him for that and for giving us an opportunity to participate. It is, of course, a goal for all that all countries across the globe have access to healthcare. I'm my party's health spokesperson, so health's a big issue for me, whether it be here in the United Kingdom or whether it be elsewhere in the world. Also, as chair of the all-party parliamentary group for freedom of religious belief, very important to speak up for those where persecution takes place, and also for those who have human rights abuses. These issues are so important, and I want to represent that. The delivery of healthcare in Gaza is so important, vitally important, as the Honourable Gentleman for Stroud outlined. Despite the acts of terror inflicted by Hamas, the children and the innocent people deserve better, and it is crucial that we recognise that. And today we can act collectively and singularly as individuals as well throughout this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. One of the things, and I see the member for Leicester West here, he and I would talk about these things often, and the one thing that grieves me greatly, Sir Jeremy, is to watch wee children suffering, to see some of the atrocities, some of the things that happen to them, pregnant women deprived of basic medical supplies. These things have to be asked, and the questions have to be asked, and urgent medical need. I know that the Minister will never be found wanting, and this government will not be found wanting when it comes to doing their bit. I'm convinced of that. But maybe sometimes collectively we need to do those things in conjunction with other countries in the world. To start with, Sir Jeremy, there's a severe strain on Gaza's healthcare system, especially for children, for pregnant women, those with chronic illnesses as well. Sometimes forgotten. The Honourable Gentleman in an intervention referred to mental health as well, another massive issue. In my constituency of Strangford, we have two charities ultimately that help. One of those is the Samaritan's Purse. It's run by Gillian Gilliland, or Gillian Gilliland, the local rep, and they help in Gaza and elsewhere across the world. Christian Aid as well, another organisation that's very much to the fore and active in ours in Strangford getting money, but also to practically and physically help. They do their bit across Northern Ireland to respond in areas of humanitarian aid and need. When victims of war, of poverty, of disaster, of disease and famine cry out, organisations such as these are often the first to answer.
Would the honourable member be
Happy to, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for giving way, and he's giving a very good point in what is an important debate. Would he agree with me if he has had the same response from constituents, that there is an overwhelming level of concern amongst constituents across the country about the restrictions on the international aid organisations like Christian Aid, like he's mentioned, restricting access, and that there is a genuine concern that after the war people are still suffering because of this restriction?
For that intervention, yes, I'm not different from anybody else. I would get in the very same points the Honourable Lady has referred to, and everyone else in this room and those who aren't in this room will also have the same issue as well. I mentioned those two organisations because they're physically, practically active in the Middle East and elsewhere. Repeated conflict will lead to limited access to medical supplies alongside the pressure on the hospital infrastructure. In addition, Hamas administration policy, ongoing issues complicate healthcare delivery and lead to a significant impact on their own people. Residents on both sides of the Gaza Strip who are devastated and losing livelihoods at the lack of available healthcare delivery. According to the word...
I do thank him for giving way because I know he's under time pressure. He has mentioned Hamas twice, and they are an absolutely awful organisation, and I want to see the end of them. But he must also accept that Netanyahu has some role to play in this crisis and has to take ownership of the problem as well.
Everybody has a role to play in the problem. He's absolutely right. But just for the record, Israel aren't perfect, because I'm not perfect. And the Honourable Gentleman's not perfect. We do things we shouldn't do, and there's accountability in a process. So I make that point, but I look back quite clearly to where it started. Hamas started the thing to start with, and they have to have. I've mentioned them specifically in this year, but it's not about. It's about the people who need help. That's why we're here. Let's focus on that. I don't think I can, because it's not fair on everybody else just to come afterwards. Yeah. Hamas' control plays a huge part in the lack of healthcare provision, including the use of civilian areas for military purposes. This complicates the delivery of aid and protection of residential areas, and to say that there are chronic systematic weaknesses is an understatement. To conclude, Sir Jeremy, it's important to understand the context in which these challenges exist. Hamas' control over Gaza, its embedding of military infrastructure within civilian areas, its prioritisation of terror and over public service have directly contributed to the chronic weaknesses in the healthcare system. Israel, meanwhile, continues where they can to facilitate humanitarian aid and military access where possible, working with international organisations to ensure that urgent care reaches those in need, and this must be enhanced and further encouraged. We must support the invaluable work of global and UK Northern Ireland charities providing medical supplies, clean water, essential care to children and families, while also holding Hamas accountable for the governance of failures that put healthcare workers and patients at risk. Compassion for surveillance. I have a compassionate person when it comes to issues. Others are the same. And a commitment to security are not mutually exclusive. Both must guide our response to the crisis in Gaza. Thank you.
Champion.
Thank you, Mr.
the Honourable Member Stroud for bringing this much-needed debate. I will focus on one specific aspect of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where the UK can really make a difference: medical transfers to the West Bank. Israel's continued ban on medical transfers from Gaza to hospitals in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, costs lives every day. This is not an unintended consequence of conflict, but a deliberate decision. Before October 2023, Gaza's health system functioned as part of a wider Palestinian medical network, with around 2,000 patients travelling each month from Gaza to hospitals in East Jerusalem and the West Bank for specialised treatment. Augusta Victoria and Al Makast hospitals alone handled more than 40% of Gaza's referrals. At times, nearly a third of their beds were filled with Gazan patients. However, that system collapsed overnight. Since October 23, Israel has banned all internal medical transfers from Gaza. In January 2026, the Israeli government confirmed to its own High Court that it is standing by its refusal to allow seriously ill patients to travel to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, citing vague security concerns, but offering no evidence of the threat supposedly posed by innocent Palestinian civilians. As of early 2026, more than 18,500 patients approved by the WHO are waiting for evacuation because their treatment is unavailable in Gaza. More than 4,000 of these patients are children, and more than 1,000 people have already died while waiting for care. Every week, this ban remains in place, more preventable deaths will become inevitable. Israel permits some patients to travel abroad for treatment, with more than 4,000 patients evacuated to third countries. But this only makes the continued refusal to allow access to nearby Palestinian hospitals even harder to refute. Hospitals in East Jerusalem are within a couple of hours' drive from Gaza. The World Health Organization has been clear. Reopening this route is the fastest, safest and most cost-effective way to save lives. Instead, patients are forced through the Rafah crossing, which operates under extremely severe restrictions. Exits through the crossings are capped at around 50 patients per day, with each allowed only 2 family members. At this pace, they will not survive long enough to be treated. At the current rate, Save the Children estimates that evacuating those in need could take more than a year. Furthermore, while departures through Rafah are possible, re-entry is heavily restricted, with more than 20,000 Palestinians who left Gaza earlier in the war still waiting to return. This puts medical evacuees in an impossible position. If you leave for essential treatment, you risk permanent displacement. Medical evacuations must not become de facto forcible transfer. Under the 4th Geneva Convention, Israel, as the occupying power, has a duty to ensure access to medical care and supplies and to maintain medical services. At the same time, Article 33 explicitly prohibits collective punishment. A blanket ban on all medical transfers imposed regardless of individual circumstances risk breaching all of these obligations. The government rightly emphasises the importance of international humanitarian law. Now is the time to put that into practice. The government should publicly urge Israel to lift the ban on internal medical transfers and continue emergency overseas evacuations only as a stopgap, not as a substitute for lawful access to nearby care. Restoring access to hospitals in the West Bank and East Jerusalem would save lives, relieve pressure on Gaza's collapsing health system, and reaffirm a basic principle that the sick must never be treated as a security risk by default.
Thank you, Senator Jeremy. It's an honour to serve with your leadership, and can I thank the Honourable Member for Stroud, not just for securing this debate, but for his real impassioned speech to begin this topic. It's really, really appreciated. Mr. Chair, last week I, along with over 2 billion people, welcomed in Ramadan, the month of fasting, a month of reflection, a month of prayer, and it's generally across the globe from the Muslim community treated as a guest. It comes, we really appreciate it, enjoy the month, which gives us a lot of blessings, and then it leaves us. And this is no different for the people of Gaza. In fact, a young man by the name of Ibrahim speaking to the independent newspaper described how Ramadan in Gaza before the war, he described it as, had a very softness to it. He explained how he remembered the warm glow of lanterns. In fact, my house is in fact lit up as well, and the lanterns were hanging in the narrow streets of Gaza with the smell of freshly baked bread before Maghrib, which is the evening prayer just before we break our fast, and the sound of children laughing in the evening prayer, Tarawih, where in Ramadan the Muslim families sort of come alive in the evening, and families gather in large numbers, doors are open and visits are constant. But this year he explained how the tables are modest, but his prayers are still heavy, and they break their fast with what is available. But we still welcome it because life is not easy, but because life remains. So let's have a look at what's actually remaining. If anybody has seen the scenes, it's a scene from a disaster movie, a dystopian disaster movie, where people are breaking their fast with a backdrop of utter apocalyptic devastation. They're breaking bread amongst 60 million tons of rubble because of the destruction of more than 90% of their homes. And they're eating their dates, which is what we break our fast with traditionally. But I can assure you the sweetness of those dates cannot mask the bitterness of the death and the destruction and the decay that surrounds each and every one of them. Minister, imagine breaking your fast while you're sitting meters away from collapsed buildings where your friends and family lived. Knowing that beneath that debris, according to reports, there are over 10,000 people still remaining. Their loved ones, their friends, their family, their teachers. They're unidentified, and they pray beside them and they eat beside them. Whilst the official death toll in Gaza has reached 72,000, which is equivalent to one out of every 33 people in Gaza has been killed, a further 171,000 have been injured, or roughly 1 in 4. The true number we only know and expect it to be much, much higher. Indeed, I can truly say the joy of Ramadan has disappeared from most of the Muslim world. But even with the so-called ceasefire that came into effect on the 10th of October 2025, at least 603 Palestinians have been killed and 1,600 have been wounded, rendering it just a ceasefire in name only. Can I just ask the Minister, if 603 Israelis had been killed in the past 4 months, would we be all grateful and welcoming a ceasefire? And I would like to just briefly focus in my short time on the children, which have already been mentioned before, but also the sanctity of healthcare and the right of every child to be treated when they are sick. The children have indeed been the innocent bystanders who have faced the brunt of the IDF carnage. Children are telling aid workers, reported by Save the Children, that they want to die, Chair. And they want to die because there is food and water in heaven, but because their parents are there. And death has indeed visited many of the children of Gaza. In fact, 20,000 Palestinian children have been killed. More than 100 have been killed since that so-called ceasefire. That's a child every single day. And those that death has spared has been plagued with over 40,500 injuries. Children, as has already been mentioned, account for a quarter of all the amputations in Gaza over the past 2 years, making Gaza the place with the highest number of child amputees per capita, according to the International Rescue Committee. So let's consider this, Minister. Children have seen their neighbourhoods, their schools, their colleges, their universities, their homes destroyed. Their parents pulverised in front of their eyes. Their siblings shredded into a million pieces. And now their own bodies destroyed. I ask, in whose arms are these children going to find solace? How do we envision a peaceful coexistence when these young souls have witnessed such barbaric, brutal horrors? We must act, Minister, we must act now, because over 18,500 require urgent medical care, while only 2,700 have been evacuated, according to Physicians for Human Rights. And since October 2025, only 235 patients have been evacuated, and many have died just waiting. And since, from May 2024, the Rafah crossing has finally opened on the 2nd of February of this year, but only 12 patients a day have been allowed to leave on average, despite Israel's commitment to allowing 50 people needing medical care to leave each day. The current rate of evacuation would mean it would take 4.5 years for people needing medical care to leave Gaza, and children are dying waiting for basic medical care. The Honourable Member of Rotherham has already mentioned hospitals in Jerusalem, a mere 70 kilometres away, have the facility to treat these patients with trauma. We must facilitate the opening of the humanitarian corridor to East Jerusalem for urgent medical evacuation. Secondly, Minister, we must ensure that international medical NGOs can operate freely and bring equipment, medication and personnel without obstruction. This weaponisation of bureaucracy by insisting on the registration of aid workers by the ADF is costing lives. And we must ensure, as already mentioned, that children in addition to their health needs, are prioritised. We must ensure that they must also get rehab hospitals and clinics. They must also provide comprehensive mental health and psychosocial support, particularly for the most vulnerable children, such as those that have been orphaned, separated and disabled. And we must advocate for an independent rather than an Israeli-controlled aid access mechanism for Gaza moving forward. Minister, we owe it to the children, we owe it to all the healthcare workers who didn't abandon their duty, and we owe it to ourselves who claim to uphold international law. Because without health, there is no recovery. Without recovery, there is no peace. And without peace, this cycle will simply begin again. Minister, the time is to act now.
Lizzie College.
Thank you, Mr Jeremy. It's a pleasure to serve here today under your chairship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Stroud, for bringing this very important debate. It's been 137 days since the ceasefire started in Gaza, and whilst attention has drifted in the media, the humanitarian crisis rages on. The health sector is at absolute breaking point. Medicines are scarce, hospitals lie in ruins, and the wards have been reduced to rubble. And temporary relief will not be enough. What's required is a sustained and effective humanitarian response and the rebuilding of Gazan healthcare. So not only must we put pressure on the Israeli government to fully open the border, allow that aid in, allow transfers of care, but the international community has to go further. We have to ensure that Gaza has the infrastructure and sustainability long term to cope with future crises. Years of blockade have left Gaza with a staggering list of challenges: shortages of medical equipment, medication, the destruction of hospitals that we've seen, the killing of staff, and an absence of patient evacuations. Bombs and bullets are not the only thing that have been killing Gazans. Lack of access to medical care has already killed thousands of them. At the start of the war in 2023, there were 1,244 kidney patients in Gaza. Now that number is just 622. Now 30 of those patients have been documented to have died in Israeli military attacks, but hundreds have died simply for the lack of dialysis. The shortages of medicines are still acute. Basic painkillers have become a luxury, and more than half of the people in Gaza don't have access to their regular medication. Lab tests are at risk of a complete standstill. Oncology, surgery, operating rooms, intensive care, all hit very badly. Ongoing restrictions on the free passage of medical equipment from the Israeli government has meant quantities of medicine reaching Gaza's hospitals is just simply not enough. And it's not only the supplies. As my honourable friend has laid out, Gaza's medical workforce has been devastated. Over 1,700 medical workers have been killed, 3,000 wounded, and more than 500 abducted or detained. 22 hospitals have been put out of service, 211 ambulances damaged. Of Gaza's 176 primary healthcare centres, only a third remain even partially functional. Health services are overwhelmed. Thousands of critically ill patients can't be evacuated. 20,000 patients are waiting for treatment abroad, but Rafah is still not fully open. Options are severely constrained. And these evacuations aren't just a matter of immediate care. They, of course, relieve the crushing pressure that's still there on the ongoing healthcare system. And there are functioning hospitals, as my honourable friends have laid out, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem. But access to them have been barred, which seems cruel. I'll happily give way.
Thank you, lady, for making a magnificent contribution to this debate. Does she not also accept that with, as the Honourable Member for Stroud has explained, the imminent departure of aid agencies forced by the Israeli regime out of Gaza, that in fact a lot of international aid workers have been into that country. I mean, one from Cornwall was killed by the IDF, Jim Henderson, in March 2024, and you know, really we do need to open up Gaza to those aid workers and to get the IDF out.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention. He's absolutely right. The deregistering of international organisations is absolutely abhorrent. They're absolutely vital to this response, and I touch on that later. In these insurmountable barriers, healthcare workers have absolutely persevered. They have rebuilt health centres Open heart surgeries have resumed at Al-Quds Hospital. Childbirth services have restarted. I can't be the only woman in the room who would have died in childbirth without medical intervention. So to think of all those Palestinian women giving birth without medical support is horrendous, and the impact, of course, on child and maternal mortality. International humanitarian organisations have been absolutely indispensable. UNRWA carried out a 10-day vaccination campaign, which reached a third of Gazan children, which is absolutely fantastic. And we and the rest of the international community must put pressure on Israel. It must demand the immediate release of detained medical personnel, guarantee their protection to do their work. It must insist on the Rafah crossing being opened, allowing in those essential life-saving equipment. And we must insist on lifting this forthcoming ban on organisations like Médecins Sans Frontières. Restoring and rebuilding the healthcare systems will be, of course, a core part of overall reconstruction efforts, but we must look further into the future. The blockade and systematic underfunding has meant that even in times of relative peace, Gazan healthcare was very fragile. Reconstruction can't mean rebuilding that fragility that existed before. We need to strengthen that local medical education, infrastructure training. This can only come with a free, democratic Palestinian state. Palestinians deserve to live in peace and in health, as do all their neighbours. And I think what the situation in Gaza shows, Sir Jeremy, is that health is more than a technical issue or getting medicines. It's political, it's structural, and it is absolutely central to any hope of lasting peace.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy. The situation in Gaza is beyond appalling in every way you can think of. And I congratulate the member for Stroud on gaining this debate, and also the wonderful Palestinian activists in his constituency who do a fantastic job in drawing attention to all this. We have to have some sense of urgency about this. We have a continuation of the occupation. We have Israel now using thermal weapons, which have killed over 2,000 people since last year, and these weapons basically vaporize the body, and over 2,000 people have been killed by this, temperatures reaching as high as 3,500 degrees. This is barbaric by any stretch of the imagination. That is the temperatures achieved when a nuclear explosion takes place. If you look at the vaporized bodies that are silhouetted on the streets of Hiroshima, that is now what the people of Gaza are having to tolerate. This is disgusting at any level. And then the continued occupation of Gaza by Israel, and then the so-called Trump peace plan, which is such a disgusting misuse of language, it's unbelievable, is actually a military reoccupation of Gaza, and now a very large military base being built in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, presumably to assist the expulsion of many Palestinian people from Gaza and the construction of hotels and casinos and all the rest of it, which is what the dream of that wretched peace plan is. Can we not ask our British government to do something serious and say we can totally condemn the Trump plan? We totally condemn the reoccupation of Gaza. We totally...
I apologise for interrupting the right, but he knows that the terms of this debate are fairly confined to healthcare. And then he's perfectly entitled to set out the context, but I know he will want to come on shortly to discuss healthcare specifically.
I thank you, Sir Jeremy. And say to the British government, will you kindly do everything you can to allow MSF and all the others to continue working in Gaza, to respect the work of the health workers and those that were assassinated by the Israeli occupation. And unless we look at the wider context of this, it is impossible to get a solution. So that does require a political action by the British government to enable health workers to be able to carry out their work. The consequences of the health disaster, which is Gaza at the moment, are obviously, as colleagues have pointed out, large numbers of deaths, large numbers of orphan children, many dying in childbirth, mothers dying in childbirth and so on, because of the lack of equipment. And as the member of Stroud pointed out, it would be perfectly possible to get emergency medical equipment in very quickly, operating theatres and so on. The world has beyond the capacity to deal with every health problem in Gaza. Why is it not being done? Because Israel will not allow it to happen, will not allow it to go in. And unless we are going to be utterly determined as a country and a government to get that medical equipment into Gaza, then the situation will simply continue to get worse and worse. And we'll be wringing our hands here in 6 months' time, a year's time, and so on, as many of us have been for many years wringing our hands about the treatment of the Palestinian people. The long-term consequences of this, of course, do not disappear. The communicable diseases are going to get worse, the sewage system will get worse, and the mental health trauma of future generations will not go away. I remember talking to Dr. Mona Farah the day after the election that I was an observer at in 2006 in Gaza. I went to her apartment in Gaza City, and I said to her, Mona, what's the mental health situation of people in Gaza? This is now, this is 2006, 20 years ago. She said, Jeremy, by my estimate, 70% of the population now are suffering severe and profound mental health trauma. That was at the point when there was some degree of hope for the future. There was some degree of optimism at that time. Now there is no hope, there is no optimism, and I think you're talking about the entirety of the population suffering from mental health trauma, and that will carry on intergenerationally, and we are supplying weapons which has allowed some of this to happen. So I simply say to the government, do everything you can to demand access for healthcare workers, everything you can to get the equipment in there, and everything you can to end the occupation of Gaza and allow the people of Palestine to decide their own future in their own land and what society they want to create there. It's not up to us to recolonise it, it's up to us to help them liberate their own lives.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. It's a pleasure seeing you in the chair. Clinicians targeted by arrests, torture and bullets, 1,700 killed. Hospitals, clinics and ambulances destroyed by bombs and drones. Medical aid, equipment and pharmaceuticals blocked at the border, and patients denied healthcare from blasts and bullets, disease and infection, poor sanitation and malnutrition at scales unimaginable. Mental trauma has engulfed every mind. Sexual violence has violated innocent women and girls. The crisis continues. And yet, where are we today? The rights to healthcare, to life itself destroyed, international humanitarian law breached, and the ICJ ruling undermined as daily violations occur, all while the IDF has destroyed every place where someone can heal. I'm going to just continue for a moment. Apart from 3 field hospitals, 3 primary health centres and 6 medical points, all functioning health facilities are only partially functioning. 18 hospitals, 105 primary healthcare centres and 233 medical points remain non-functional in Gaza as of the 30th of January.
And she was at the same meeting that I was when we heard from Human Rights for Medical Aid. I was struck by the figure that there are on the World Health Organization wait list from Gaza 18,500 people awaiting medical treatment. East Jerusalem hospitals have stated that they're able to receive those in care for $8.50 a day. So there is local provision available. Is she as distressed as I am that this is being refused? And perhaps she can elicit some response from the Minister.
I absolutely am, and I heard that evidence too. And of course, that passage for the whole of the Palestinian healthcare system must be open. Even now, aid cannot enter Gaza, and in 4 days' time, 37 organisations will lose their registration to operate. The provision of healthcare, but also the whole humanitarian support network will collapse. While every step the government takes is welcome, it has been woefully inadequate, leaving people in an indescribable health crisis. I will never forget the clinicians who have taken time to inform us of the conditions they work in, the scale of the challenges they face, and the clinical choices they make, including one clinician who described having to make the choice of which child to save as they looked on these little bodies writhing in pain and distorted by brutality. Yet the provision of healthcare, water, nutrition and sanitation will evaporate this week. If countries do not step up its efforts in the next few hours, enabling disease to spread further and faster will occur. So some questions I want to ask the Minister. What specific demands has he made on the Israeli government to release all 309 health workers hostage as hostages and prisoners, because their skills are urgently needed? What specific demands has he made on the Israeli government to extend the right of all NGOs providing healthcare or preventing ill health through food and sanitation projects to be allowed to continue their work in Gaza despite the registration scheme? When did he last call in the ambassador for Israel in the light of the immediate removal of their NGOs to deliver healthcare and vital humanitarian aid? And if she does not extend these licences, why extend her stay in the UK?
Absolutely.
What has been her response? And what sanctions are the UK government going to apply to the Israeli government for ending access to NGO support for humanitarian work in Gaza? And finally, how has he sought for people suffering in Gaza to move from East Jerusalem and the West Bank, where clinicians are ready to receive him? And what more can this UK government do in the light that it is our manufactured parts to F-35s that have inflicted so many of these wounds to ensure that we provide the healthcare facilities here and wherever we can to save these precious lives?
We need to move on to front bench contributions around about 10:28. We have two speakers left, so if they can keep themselves below 4 minutes, we can get you both in. Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Chairship, and I congratulate my honourable friend from Stroud for his securing this debate and his expertise in this area. But Sir Jeremy, the Israeli government carries out these crimes against humanity because they can, and no one stops them. For nearly 2 years, Gaza's healthcare system has been systematically dismantled during Israel's military campaign. The World Health Organization reports 735 attacks on healthcare in Gaza from the 7th of October 23 to the 11th of June last year. In 2024, the UN Commission of Inquiry concluded Israel has implemented a concerted policy to destroy the healthcare system of Gaza. Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese stated the targeted destruction of Gaza's healthcare system by the IDF amounts to medicide, part of the intentional creation of conditions calculated to destroy Palestinians in Gaza, which constitutes an act of genocide. One image stays with me, Sir Jeremy: a hospital tent, a patient on a drip, flames climbing the IV line, a man too sick to run. That's what the destruction of a health system looks like. And amid this horror, there have been many extraordinary courages from many British medics, from Middlesbrough's Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, Professor Hassan Abu Sitta, amongst the very many. They have stitched, they have amputated, delivered babies, and kept children alive in wards without power under bombardment. Even under the so-called ceasefire, Israel restricts healthcare. Dual-use restrictions block medical equipment, imaging machines, prosthetic materials, and surveillance tablets. Over 6,000 amputees await limbs. Only a few hundred prostheses have been allowed in. Stocks will run out. Israel has moved to deregister more than 35 international NGOs, including those funded by the British public organisations that deliver 1 in 3 births in Gaza and hundreds of thousands of consultations. They are being forced to hand over staff data or be shut down. Medical evacuations remain desperately limited. The WHO lists 18,000 people in urgent need of care outside Gaza. These actions, deliberate targeting of healthcare, obstruction of aid, killing and detention of medical personnel raises serious questions under international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention. A ceasefire must mean ceasefire. Israel must uphold the ceasefire, lift its blockade on medical aid, end registration rules, allow safe passage for patients, permit reconstruction of hospitals, release detained healthcare workers. And the UK government must do more than issue statements. It must interrogate Israel's actions, their intent, and enforce consequences. We're seeing scenes where the dogs are healthy in Gaza and the people are starving. Ask ourselves, how is it that the dogs are so healthy? Where are they getting their nutrition? I'll leave you to make your own minds up. I asked the Minister, has the government assessed whether the UK supplied arms, including F-35s, were used in strikes on healthcare, and will it publish that assessment? Will he state without equivocation that the destruction of hospitals in Gaza is a breach of international humanitarian law and in direct contravention of the Genocide Convention? What diplomatic or economic consequences has the UK imposed in response to Israel blocking 18,000 patients? What consequences will Israel face for deregistering aid agencies? And how is the UK implicated through the Civil Military Coordination Centre? Given that the UK has sanctioned over 1,500 individuals in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's beyond reprehensible that such glaring double standards have been adhered to here. The UK's diplomatic statements have not shifted the Israeli government policy one iota. We must use leverage, trade measures, arms controls, sanctions, concrete consequences for grave breaches of international law. Healthcare is protected in war. That is not optional. It is the law. The UK has not done anywhere near enough to exert pressure on Israel, and if the same ineffective stance is maintained, it risks facing charges of complicity. We have more than diplomacy in our locker, and it's absolutely criminal that the UK is not using the levers available. We have legal, moral, historical obligations and responsibilities to the Palestinians, who this country has betrayed for over 100 years, from the Balfour Declaration to this day, and the genocide continues. In the name of God, I ask the Minister, I urge him and this government to do the right thing and act before the Palestinian people are completely wiped from the map.
Thank you. I can give the Honourable Lady 3 minutes. Lorraine Beavers.
Thank you. It is an honour to serve under your chairship. Today's debate concerns healthcare in Gaza, but the truth is this: there is almost no healthcare left. Hospitals have been bombed, doctors and nurses have been killed, children are having limbs amputated without proper pain relief, babies are born into tents, into hunger and into fear. There is not a functioning healthcare system, it is collapsed, and it is children who are paying the highest price. Thousands of children are being killed, many more have been injured. Gaza now has an entire generation of children living with life-changing disabilities. Imagine being the child who survives a bomb, loses a leg and then can't get a wheelchair, or even basic medicine. Imagine being a parent who knows their child needs treatment but cannot get them out. A Palestinian child died on Sunday. Nidal had been granted medical referral documents 14 months ago, but died waiting for Israel to grant him permission to leave Gaza. More children will die waiting if we don't fight. Children are sleeping on the bare ground in the cold. They are drinking dirty water. They are dying from illness. And we know how to... illnesses that we know how to treat. Almost every child is now carrying deep psychological trauma from what they have seen and lost. The views of many experts is that we are witnessing a genocide. We have a moral duty to do everything in our power to put an end to this horror, because it is not inevitable. But aid is being blocked. Israel has revoked the licence of 37 international NGOs. This is outrageous and will without doubt add to the suffering and the trauma and the deaths of more Palestinian children. Medical supplies are still not getting in at the scale needed. Humanitarian organisations are still being prevented from doing their work. This country cannot fix everything, but we are not powerless and we are not doing enough. We must push for crossings to be fully opened so medicine, fuel and food can get in. We must fund medical equipment, rehabilitation and mental health care for children whose lives have been shattered. We must stand up for humanitarian agencies so they can operate freely and safely. And we must make clear that hospitals and healthcare workers must never be the targets. This debate is not about politics. It's about whether a child who survives a bomb is then allowed to live. Right now, too many are not. We owe them and more than our sympathy. We owe them action. Thank you.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady very much for her cooperation and self-restraint, and the same to all colleagues who've spoken. We must now move on to front bench contributions, beginning with the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Monica Harding.
Pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Stroud for bringing this important debate to the floor and for bringing his own expertise to this issue. More than 2 years of devastating conflict have left Gaza in ruins. Over 70,000 Palestinians have lost their lives. More than 1 million people remain unable to return to their homes, while the vast majority of the population still relies on humanitarian aid to survive. The attacks carried out by Hamas on the 7th of October were appalling, and their continued violations since the ceasefire remain indefensible. They must play no future role in the governance of Gaza. Israel's war on Gaza over the past 2 years has been conducted without due regard for international humanitarian law, with devastating consequences for the Gazan healthcare system. Gaza's healthcare system is no longer functioning in any meaningful sense. Doctors on the ground describe surgeons being forced to amputate limbs and stitch wounds without anaesthesia. Patients remain fully conscious because there is no fuel, no pain relief and no functioning supply chains. This has been the daily reality inside Gaza's hospitals as they buckle under the continued bombardment, medicine shortages and staff losses. There is not a single fully functioning hospital left. Even since the ceasefire, more than 500 Palestinians have been killed and over 1,500 injured. There is urgency to protect civilians and rebuild a shattered healthcare system. Aid access is in a state of crisis. Medical staff are exhausted, many nurses have fled, doctors have been killed, equipment has been destroyed, antibiotics are scarce. Amputations are common because injuries go untreated. Cancer care is barely available, dialysis is severely limited. Intensive care is stretched beyond breaking point, and routine vaccinations have been disrupted. Thousands of patients are effectively queued with no realistic access to care, and some remain in hospitals have been described by doctors on the ground as waiting stations for death. At the same time, as we have heard, medical evacuation is limited, and beyond hospitals, public health conditions are in a dire state. Unsafe water, poor sanitation, overcrowding, and winter conditions have driven notable increases in respiratory infected and diarrheal disease. Vaccination coverage has already been fragile before the war and is now years behind. And the UN has warned that tens of thousands of pregnant women, newborns and children now face compounded risks of malnutrition, disease and preventable death, not from bombs, but from a shattered health system unable to provide prenatal care, vaccinations or even basic hygiene. And on top of this, additional Israeli administrative restrictions introduced which place dozens of international humanitarian organisations under new registration requirements, with limited timeframes to comply, and the deadline of the 1st of March next week is approaching fast. The uncertainty over legal status and operational permissions continues to disrupt medical deployments, supply procurement and programme continuity at a moment when trauma care, dialysis, maternal health services and infectious disease control depend heavily on international partnerships, and at the same time tighter Israeli constraints on major humanitarian service providers, particularly UNRWA, have had direct knock-on effects for health delivery. When indispensable agencies such as UNRWA that run primary care clinics, vaccination programs and community health outreach face limits on staff entry, access to premises, utilities, banking or logistics, the impact is immediate and severe. Because healthcare does not function in isolation, it relies on fuel for generators, secure facilities, functioning cold chains for vaccines and the ability to move personnel and supplies without obstruction. If the operating space for humanitarian organisations is narrowed, the remaining fragments of Gaza's healthcare system weaken further. So it is fair to ask, what is the UK government doing about all of this? There have been some positive steps. The additional aid packages, including the 20 million humanitarian post-ceasefire package, is to be welcomed. And the government has supported around 50 sick and injured children to come to the UK for the NHS treatment under a Gaza medical evacuation scheme. And there have been diplomatic efforts at the UN Security Council, but the UK has much more work to do. First, the government must make reliable humanitarian access a top-tier diplomatic objective. The Israeli government must immediately allow international humanitarian NGOs full access to Gaza and to the West Bank. The government must coordinate with European partners to apply sustained diplomatic pressure on Israel, to reverse the ban on aid organisations and engage with Washington directly and consistently and regularly on this issue. There must be consequences if access continues to be denied, and the UK must act with like-minded partners to establish alternative delivery channels. We should apply coordinated pressure for full access across all crossings, while scaling up parallel routes to ensure aid reaches those who need it. Second, the UK must treat the protection of healthcare workers and medical NGOs as a red line. Medical neutrality has to be defended in practice, not merely asserted in principle. Third, it is vital that international journalists are granted full access to the Gaza Strip so the world can see events on the ground clearly and independently. The UK must continue to press for this. Fourth, we must expand sanctions. It is right that we have sanctioned some ministers, but that cannot be where it stops. We should also sanction other ministers in the Israeli government who oppose the lifting of the aid blockade or promote the erosion of humanitarian protections. Accountability must be consistent, or it means nothing. Let me close on the West Bank itself, because what is unfolding there is not peripheral to this crisis, it is central to it. Across the West Bank, settlement, expansion, demolitions and tightening movement restrictions are accelerating displacement and entrenching instability. I support my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, in her call for medical transfers to the West Bank. But here too, while most hospitals remain technically operational, medicine shortages are deepening and referral approvals are increasingly delayed. This winter alone, hundreds of attacks on healthcare facilities were recorded, alongside the closure of key UNRWA services. Severe funding shortfalls are now compounding access barriers, forcing critical service reductions at precisely the moment needs are surging. To compensate, clinics and mental health teams are scaling up where they can, but for many vulnerable communities, care is becoming slower, more fragmented and increasingly out of reach. The result is an inevitable erosion of basic medical access with growing delays, disruption and unmet needs that are quietly pushing the West Bank deeper into humanitarian crisis. I hope the government will now move beyond statements and take concrete action to expand accountability through sanctions, to protect and open humanitarian access, and to press relentlessly for an equitable political pathway out of this crisis. Lives are being lost while we deliberate. The UK still carries diplomatic weight, and with that comes moral obligation. I urge the Minister to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. I call the Shadow Minister, Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Sir Jeremy. And I thank the Honourable Member for Stroud for bringing this debate today to allow us to consider this important matter, as well as honourable members who have contributed today. And just picking up on some of the things that have been said so far in the debate, I think it is pretty obvious that everybody in this room who's taken part in this debate and other debates across both this and the Chamber, all want peace for both Gaza and for Israel. As always, there will be differences about the route to that peace, what people feel is getting in the way, and what more needs to be done. And to pick up on some of the things that was said about the volume of aid, and to note that since the conflict, around 2 million tonnes of aid have entered Gaza, and on the management of that aid, given the industrial scale of the misappropriation of aid and the dual-use items that have enabled Hamas over 2 decades to build its terror network and to sustain its war effort, this is required to ensure that those security concerns are addressed. And also goes... if you allow me to make a little bit of progress through, given the time, I will take interventions. Given that the new NGO restrictions that are coming in place affects around 15% of those aid agencies operating within Gaza, and those agencies have contributed around 1% of the aid delivery throughout this conflict, some of those who have had the restrictions notified have applied and have been approved to operate again in that area. I'll happily take an intervention.
I wonder if you're, as Shadow Minister, thank you. I wonder if the Shadow Minister is aware that the aid that's getting in is things like chocolate bars, not the medical needs that are so desperately required. He speaks about volume, but we're actually talking about the substance of what's getting in, the life-saving aid, not the peripheries that people are making money from.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention and my temporary elevation. I enjoyed my 30 seconds as a Minister, but that is all for now. I will come on to future aid and the volume of aid that needs to get in the substantive speech that I'm about to make, and in terms of, as I referenced in the response, dual-use items and others, which I will touch on in my substantive speech. I was just wanting to pick up and address some of the alternative facts that are there. I do need to make progress, otherwise we are going to run out of time. The situation in Gaza is serious and severe, and Hamas and their Iranian sponsors bear responsibility for the continued suffering. Hamas launched their attack on Israel on the 7th of October. Hamas has refused to disarm, and Hamas have infiltrated and used civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, as shields and as military defensive positions. The whole House should be united in calling them out, and it is important the Minister gives an update on the steps the Government is taking to support the implementation of the 20-point peace plan for Gaza, including the removal of Hamas. On the point of removing Hamas, I give way.
I'm sure everybody in this chamber is absolutely opposed to the horrific Hamas attacks that took place on the 7th of October 2023. What I am confused about is to why the Shadow Minister and his party continue to repeat Israeli propaganda points. I was an aid worker before I was elected to this place. I was in Gaza during the war. And all of the things that he is repeating about misappropriation and stealing of aid, could you give us some examples, please? Give us one concrete example.
Thank you very much. I will come on to the UN's stats on the amount of aid that has been misappropriated very shortly in my speech. I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention, and I think it is a tad rich to talk about one-sidedness when we didn't hear the word Hamas hardly mentioned from many of the contributions mentioned today earlier. So, the Government says it has been calling for broader aid access, but calling for something is not the same as achieving it. We need to know whether ministers have put forward specific, concrete proposals for the opening of individual crossings and entry points into Gaza, and whether those proposals have been presented directly to the Government of Israel and their response. Could the Minister also tell us what quantity and type of medical aid has been funded and prepared for this moment, where it is currently stationed, how much has entered Gaza, which organisations are distributing it, and critically, what new safeguards are in place to ensure that UK aid reaches innocent civilians and not terrorist groups. Aid diversion is not a peripheral concern, it is a central one. Since the ceasefire announcement on the 10th of October 2025 and 11th of February 2026, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs notes that 1,532 aid pallets have been verified as being intercepted during transit within Gaza. While the destination of these pallets clearly cannot be confirmed, I don't think it requires too much imagination to work out where it has ended up. That is why we cannot discuss Gaza's healthcare collapse in isolation from the wider political and security situation, because the two are inseparable. The ceasefire provides an opening, but a ceasefire is not peace, and the Government seems curiously reluctant to acknowledge what is needed to convert one into the other. If the ceasefire is to translate into something sustainable, Hamas must be removed from power and once and for all, and their terrorist infrastructure must be dismantled. Events of recent days, the violence between Hamas and armed groups and clans within Gaza itself, underline precisely why Hamas cannot be permitted any future role in the governance of the territory. Hamas has no regard for human life or human dignity. It never has. Which brings me to governance, because rebuilding Gaza's health system without addressing who actually governs Gaza is an exercise in futility. Has this government had any meaningful say in the composition of the transitional administration? Has anything of substance on governance reform emerged from the so-called Memorandum of Understanding with the Palestinian Authority, a document that did not even address corruption or anti-Semitism in school curricula? If the Palestinian Authority is to play an extended role, it must implement the most significant reforms in its history. This includes healthcare, welfare, I'm running out of time, and I've taken several interventions. This includes healthcare, welfare, education, and frankly, basic democratic accountability. We should be conditioning our support on those reforms being delivered. Has the government made the case clearly to the Palestinian Authority? Could I also ask the Minister if the UK will be scaling up its involvement in the Civil Military Coordination Centre? Is Britain contributing to the demilitarisation of Gaza and the disarming of Hamas? Has the government had any discussions with the United States about the consequences for Hamas if they do not engage constructively with Phase 2 ceasefire?
The central debate is about medical health care in Gaza, and the Shadow Minister isn't referring to that at all, apart from a tenuous relating to healthcare statement. I wonder if you could give some clarity whether or not his speech is on point.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her point of order, and as she knows, because she heard me intervene in the debate a little earlier, I've been listening very carefully to ensure that speakers keep to healthcare. But as she also heard me say to the Right Honourable Gentleman earlier, it's perfectly in order for speakers to talk about the context to a degree, and I have been listening carefully to the Shadow Minister. If what he'd said had been out of order, I would have told him so. But I'm grateful to her for her point of order. And if I may take the opportunity while I'm on my feet, she knows and all members know that this has been a serious and passionate debate throughout. And I hope that members will respect the fact that passionate contributions from both sides of the argument are perfectly rational and in order and should be heard with the same respect that all other contributions have been heard with. Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Sir Jeremy, and for the continued points of order and interventions from the Honourable Member. I will continue from where I started at the last paragraph. Could I also ask the Minister if the UK will be scaling up its involvement in the Civil Military Coordination Centre? Is Britain contributing to the demilitarisation of Hamas, and has the government had any discussions with the United States about the consequences for Hamas if they do not engage constructively with Phase 2 of the ceasefire process? We also want to see the UK engaged in expanding the Abraham Accords. Saudi normalisation with Israel remains, in our view, the single most consequential diplomatic prize in the region and potentially the most realistic path to a durable peace. We are enthusiastic supporters of this route. We are considerably less convinced that the Labour government shares that enthusiasm or is working with the urgency the moment demands. Chair, the people of Gaza are suffering. That suffering is real. It is severe and it demands a response commensurate with its scale. The fighting war may have ceased temporarily, but the people of Gaza are still living with the jackboot of Hamas holding back any hope of prosperity or rebuilding the healthcare system. We on this side of the House have consistently called for more aid, including healthcare aid, to flow into Gaza, for it to be delivered safely and exclusively to innocent civilians, and for a sustainable end to the terrible conflict that guarantees security for both Israel and the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Sir Wright. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Stroud, for securing the debate. I won't take interventions initially, Chairman. There have been many questions asked of me, and I'll endeavour to make some progress through them before I do. Before I start my speech, I would just like to say, given the very prominent reference that's been made throughout the debate, both to the work of British doctors overseas and indeed the work of MSF overseas, I should declare that a close family member is one of those doctors working with MSF overseas, and I want to, for transparency, make that clear. I would also, Chair, just like to take this opportunity in setting the context, and as this is the first opportunity I've had since recess, to make a brief comment about events in the West Bank. I want to condemn in the strongest terms the recent Israeli Security Cabinet decisions that have introduced sweeping extensions to Israel's control over the West Bank. They accelerate illegal settlement activity. The UK is clear that Israel's illegal settlements and decisions designed to further them are a flagrant violation of international law. We will take concrete steps in accordance with international law to counter settlement expansion and to challenge policies and threats of forcible displacement and annexation. Mr. Chairman, that is important context for the discussion that we have today. I want to move straight away to agree with my honourable friend from Rotherham about the importance of the inextricable link between Gaza and the West Bank, and indeed East Jerusalem as well. The UK has recognised a Palestinian state. All three of those territories that I have mentioned are part of that state. As my honourable friend from Rochdale said, it is right that the children of Gaza are treated in Palestine where they can be. There are three major restrictions on their ability to be treated where they live. That is restrictions on equipment, restrictions on supplies, and restrictions on personnel, as my honourable friend who referred to her time in Gaza as an aid worker knows well. There are many, many talented Palestinian doctors. I was asked by one of my honourable friends about the advocacy that we have conducted on behalf of those doctors. I won't reiterate that again, Chair. I think I provided an account to the Chamber on our work in that regard. But Palestinian doctors alone are not sufficient given the healthcare demands on Gaza. It is absolutely vital that doctors from outside of Palestine are able to access Gaza in order to provide support. They can only do so effectively, firstly, if the Israelis allow them, and secondly, if they have both the hospitals and the equipment required to provide healthcare. There has been insufficient progress in that regard, and we continue to make those points clearly. I won't. In response to my honourable friend's question about the advocacy on these questions with the Israeli ambassador, I'm always keen that we are grounded in facts and up-to-date facts. She refers to the Israeli ambassador who is no longer in place. She left her post sometime last year. I did, of course, summon her in relation to the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. The Israeli government is currently represented by a charge following the appointment of a future ambassador. I want to return also to some of the tangible questions. I'm grateful for the recognition from many contributors of the work that this government has done. That has included, of course, the medical evacuation of Gazan children to the UK. I have met some of those children, as I know many others have. It is so moving to see the change to their lives as a result of them and their families being here. But they are, of course, a tiny subsection of the children in Gaza who need care. I have discussed already the restrictions on providing that care in Gaza. It is obviously right that where we cannot provide care in Palestine, exactly as the Honourable Member for Rochdale said, that care is provided in the region. We have provided that care, and I have seen it from my own eyes, in Egypt, particularly in the Sinai, in Al Arish. There are welcome improvements in the ability of Gazans who require medical assistance to cross into Egypt via the Rafah crossing and be provided with aid. But there still remain restrictions, and my honourable friend is right to highlight the very significant risk for those leaving to seek medical aid elsewhere, that they fear they will not be able to return to their homes. And we continue to advocate on those questions. We have provided, just in response to the Shadow Minister's questions about numbers, we've provided £40 million of aid in relation to health. That most recently included a £4 million DEC appeal over the Christmas period. I was very moved by the generosity of the British people to match the government's contribution, and I'm grateful for the continued efforts of many of our constituents across the country, and indeed many members here today, for continuing to raise these issues. We've provided £3 million to the WHO to support the Egyptian healthcare system to provide the assistance which I just described. Let me turn to the deregistration questions as well. As many members have noted, there is a deadline of the 1st of March. The Shadow Minister sought to provide some clarity about the limited number of NGOs that would affect, but I would just point out to him and indeed to the Chamber, this is many very reputable British organisations who are affected. We opposed this legislation when it was first proposed. We oppose it now. We need to see a solution to this issue. There are many NGOs who have sought to engage with the requests of the Israeli government, including MSF, who have received a lot of commentary this morning. There have been many genuine efforts to engage with the Israeli government on this question, including by the British government. It is absolutely vital for all of the reasons that others have put so articulately that these aid agencies can operate and continue their vital work. I was asked a range of other questions, Mr. Chair, about going slightly beyond the questions of healthcare. I would remind colleagues when they ask me to make more than statements. We have made more than statements. I am the first Middle East minister since the Balfour Declaration who can say, in this place, we recognise a Palestinian state. We have described already some of the concrete actions taken to truly transform the lives of Gazan children. We have given more aid. I will.
Absolutely. Minister, for giving way, he just mentioned about the deadline for deregistration of NGOs. If that deadline passes and there has not been a change in direction of the Israeli authorities and the Israeli government, what concrete steps will the UK government take?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure my colleagues will be tired of me being refused to draw on concrete steps in advance of taking them, but we treat this with, as a question of the utmost seriousness. We have done so all the way through these discussions, and we will, of course, respond should the already significant restrictions on NGOs, including very well-respected British NGOs, further tighten in the days ahead. I want to return to some of the other questions that were put to me. We do have a UK contribution to the CMCC. We are seeking, through that work, to try and ensure that the aid access increases into Gaza and that some of the absolutely vital governance questions for the future are addressed. We do raise these points, so I'm pleased to reassure the Shadow Minister, on a regular basis. I raised them with Palestinian counterparts just last week. There has been some very important progress on a whole range of Palestinian governance questions. I think he was referring to some of the pay-to-slay arrangements, so-called, and there's been a very important announcement from the Palestinian Authority ending that practice. There were very important announcements, including on a commitment to a demilitarised Palestinian state in July during the Two-State Solution Conference that I was very proud to be a part of. We will continue to raise these questions. Nobody is under any illusions about the scale of the threat that Hamas pose. We continue to be committed and discuss with our counterparts the importance of fully decommissioning Hamas's weapons and ensuring that there is Palestinian leadership, including through the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, so-called NCAG, which has been implemented in recent weeks. We will continue our efforts in these areas. I can't, because I wish to give my honourable friend from Stroud 2 minutes at the end. We will, of course, return, I am sure, to these questions over the coming weeks. As my honourable friend pointed out, there are pressing deadlines ahead. Given the importance of these issues, the Foreign Secretary travelled herself to chair the most recent session of the UN Security Council as its president in recent days on the Middle East. I will continue to give these questions our full attention, and I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for the opportunity.
With a little less than 2 minutes, if he wants it, Dr. Simon Oatham.
Well, thank you very much, and can I thank all the speakers today, which has been a very passionate debate. I think it's really important. I've spoken to many British doctors who worked in Gaza, and what we're presenting here as the sabotage of the healthcare system is real. This is going on now, and we must accept it and we must deal with it rather than brushing it under the carpet and blaming Hamas, etc. I will, yeah.
Very quickly, I wonder if he agrees with me on the need for justice and accountability for horrific acts that have taken part in hospitals, including in Shifa Hospital, a massacre in the grounds there, and also a situation in Nasser Hospital where many babies were left to die following Israeli military action.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, and we must get to the bottom of these things because they must not be allowed to happen again. So I'd like to thank everyone, and I also propose that the Minister talks to ministers in our DHSC about actually providing healthcare as a nation to people in Gaza as much as we can. And it's something I have discussed with that minister. And it's something that we have to be positive here and try and relieve the suffering of the Gazans, because it is everything I have heard has been appalling. So can I thank everyone and thank the minister? Thank you.
Thank you. So the question is that this House has considered government support for the healthcare system in Gaza. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
Thank you.